Welcome. Yes, okay, those people that are, I see they're going to get name tags. Okay, there's a whole bunch of people coming in the back doors. We're going to get started because we have a lot of really amazing people to speak with you today. My name is Allison Druin. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to day 5 of the Future of Information launch. Oh, thank you all for getting with us today. I am the Associate Dean for Research in the iSchool and one of the 2 co-directors of the Future of Information Alliance.
And my name is Ira Chinoy. I'm an Associate Professor in the Philip Merrill College of Journalism and the other co-director of the Future of Information Alliance. So we've come to this end of this really sort of amazing week of programs. We've been likening this, excuse me, to sort of a think tank without walls that all of you are now part of. To think about this, you know, we're focused on highlighting the role of information in our lives and the major problems and the challenges going forward and the kind of research that can be done to address them, particularly in a collaborative way. So we've been mentioning all week that in addition to bringing together faculty, staff, and students, we have a great 16-member board, brainstorming board, some of whom are here today, some of whom will be speaking to you today. And we also have a group of outside partners, and we just want to mention them again because some of them have representatives here in the room. And they are the Library of Congress, the National Archives, the Smithsonian, the Museum, the National Park Service, National Geographic Society, Sesame Workshop, the Barry School, the Online Academy, and WAMU 88.5 Radio. And Kojo Namdi from WAMU was a participant earlier in the week in a couple of things that we did. I'd like to turn it over now to Allison to talk about what we're going to do today and to introduce our visiting futurists.
Okay. At the beginning of the week, we started off with having our visiting futurists tell people a little bit about what they were doing and about how they saw the future. As we've been moving through the week, we've been moving into having them respond and inspire us and have us share with them what we've been doing here at the University of Maryland and to be starting to have a conversation about how to move things forward from the university here into the larger sphere of the future of information and as a part of the Alliance. So each of the last few days has been a different theme that had to do with the future of information. On Wednesday, it was creativity and culture. Yesterday, it was transparency and boundaries. All amazing events with amazing conversations that we really thank so many people for. Today is about science in our lives and the scientific information experience that we can move across not only disciplinary lines, but the areas of personal life and public policy. So the question is, what does this mean in terms of the future of information and bringing disciplinary information to the general world, to the general public? And we have some amazing speakers today. Yes, if I say amazing one more time, I'm very sorry. That will introduce.
But they really are.
They really are. That we will introduce shortly. But before we do that, as Ira said, I am to introduce for the 5th day. I know, and my introductions get wackier and wackier every time I introduce these amazing people. Our visiting futurists for this week. They really are pioneers in their own field. But they're also leaders in thinking about the future, and that is why we have been so enjoying them here all week long. And so our first visiting futurist, in fact, our founding visiting futurist, he's here for the 2nd week. Yeah, Abdur looks a little bit jealous at this point, Dan. Anyway, is Dr. It's your past futurist, yes, exactly. Is Dr. Dan Russell. He is a research scientist who works as Google's Director of User Happiness, and he leads efforts to improve the effectiveness of web searching. He's sometimes called a search anthropologist because of his focus on understanding how people use the tools of technology to amplify their intelligence. He's held various positions at Apple, IBM, Xerox PARC, and more. Welcome, Dan. Okay, Our next, but definitely not less visiting futurist, or less futuristic future, forget it. Dr. Mary Schwinski is a research manager of the Visualization and Interaction Research Group, otherwise known as VIBE, at Microsoft, which means Mary leads a very large HCI group at Microsoft. Mary's interests focus primarily on novel information visualization and interaction techniques. She also studies information worker task management, multitasking, and more. And she's received many awards for her amazing research, for her wonderful research. Welcome, Mary. Thank you. Okay, I'm not going to say amazing, and it has to do with Abdur. I'm going to just say, I'm going to introduce the third visiting futurist, Abdur Chowdhury. I said his name right, thank you. Abdur Chowdhury, who until about a month ago, I couldn't say his name, and he was the chief scientist at Twitter, where he worked on search recommendations, extracting the signal from the noise. Previously, Abdur was chief architect for search at AOL and held positions at Georgetown's computer science department, and he was here for a time at the University of Maryland's Institute for Systems Research. Abdur actually went to Twitter via an acquisition of Surmise, a startup company he co-founded. Welcome, Abdur.
So we're going to turn this over in a minute to our moderator for the day, and I have the pleasure of introducing him. It's Dr. Larry Sita. He's a professor of chemistry here at the University of Maryland. And Alice and I have both worked with him in various other venues, which is why we thought of him for this. And he has held faculty and academic positions at Carnegie Mellon University, the California Institute of Technology, and the University of Chicago before joining the Maryland faculty in 1999. His interests include organometallic and polymer chemistry, and in particular the development of new catalysts for industrial processes. He has numerous honors to his name, including a Beckman Young Investigator Award, a Dreyfus Scholar Teacher Award, an NSF Special Creativity Award, and in 2010, he was honored with the Schulich Visiting Professorship, Lectureship, that's a lot of ships, at the Israel Institute of Technology in Haifa. In 2008, Professor Sita founded the new startup company, Precision Polyolefins. Close enough, okay, I'll get it straight. LLC with the intent, I should have practiced that ahead, bad. With the intent to develop and commercialize new specialty chemicals that can be derived from readily available and abundant natural gas. Larry Sita.
Thank you, Allison and Ira, for the introduction. My main task is to keep us on.
Either main task is people to hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
everybody can hear me. Main task is to facilitate the discussion between our panelists and the audience and between each other. And so without further ado, I'd like to begin and introduce our faculty experts for this morning's session. Our first panelist is Dr. Linda Aldoury. She is an endowed chair and director of the Herschel S. Horowitz Center for Health Literacy. She's an associate professor in the Department of Behavioral and Community Health and affiliate faculty of Women's Studies. Her areas of research include health campaigns and their effects on diverse audiences and risk communication for women and adolescents. Dr. Aldoury was previously in the Department of Communication at Maryland and founded the Center for Risk Communication Research. She has secured cooperative agreements from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and Homeland Security for risk communication research that explored how diverse audiences of women perceive food safety messages. Linda has published journal articles on health, gender, and risk communication, and has also authored book chapters and edited a book on gender, diversity, and media. She consults for the government agencies and research firms on risk communication, research, and communication strategy. Linda? Our next faculty panelist is Dr. Robert Buchanan. He is a professor in the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources here at the University of Maryland and director of the Center for Food Safety and Security Systems. He has more than 35 years experience in food safety and working at the interface between science and public health policy. He did this first in academia, then in government service in both the USDA and the FDA, and most recently at the University of Maryland. His scientific interests are diverse and include extensive experience in such areas as predictive microbiology, quantitative microbial risk assessment, microbial physiology, microtoxicology, and what are called HACCP, which I don't know what that stands for. Okay, systems. Oh, here we go. Standing for hazard analysis and critical control points. He is widely published on subjects related to food safety and is one of the co-developers of the widely used U.S. Department of Agriculture pathogen modeling programs. Bob? Our next faculty panelist is Dr. Carol S.B. Wilson, who is a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department and the Institute for Systems Research at the University of Maryland. She is also affiliated with the Center for Comparative and Evolutionary Biology of Hearing. Her research focuses on understanding the relationship between acoustics and articulation, and it involves modeling speech production, studying speech perception, developing signal processing techniques, and using the knowledge gained to develop speech technologies. She has received numerous prestigious honors and awards as a researcher, scientist, teacher, inventor, and entrepreneur. And she is a senior figure in national scientific and professional organizations and committees focused on acoustics, speech, language, communication, and the advancement of technology. Her awards just last year included the University of Maryland Inventor of the Year Award and the Maryland Innovator of the Year Award from the Daily Baltimore Record. Carol? And finally, but not least, is Dr. Margaret Palmer, who is Director of the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, supported by the National Science Foundation and the University of Maryland. This research center is dedicated to creating synthetic, actionable science related to the structure, functioning, and sustainability of socio-environmental systems. She is past director of the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory for the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and she is well known for her work at the interface of environmental science and policy, having published in the journals Science and Nature, as well as in other popular outlets. She has been an invited speaker at numerous national and international events, including an appearance on the Stephen Colbert Show, to discuss her scientific work on mountaintop mining. Dr. Palmer's many honors and awards include being named a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as a Distinguished Scholar Teacher here at the University of Maryland, and a University System of Maryland Board of Regents Faculty Award of Excellence. And so with those introductions, I'd like to ask Linda if she could come up and give her presentation, which she will then direct a question to our panel of visiting speakers.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. All right, today I'm going to talk to you about health and communication in our life. And to begin with, I'm going to start with a couple stories. This is Ben. When Ben was 2, he could not speak any words. By the time he was 2.5, his mom began to worry because the only words he said were mama and dada. But all the other 2-year-olds seemed to be talking a lot of words. His mom didn't know anything about speech, development, or when children were supposed to be talking. And she didn't know if she was being silly for worrying, but she didn't want to seem silly to the pediatrician, so she didn't go to her pediatrician either. Instead, she went online, like she often does, to look for health communication, health information. And she searched for speech problems in children. And this is an example of what she found when she did a simple Google search for speech problems in children. Speech apraxia, delay, disorder. When should a parent Be concerned. She thought, okay, now I'm concerned. She went ahead and clicked on one of the links that sounded official, and it was talking about a family start guide, so that seemed appropriate. And this is something like what the text read in that family start guide. Childhood apraxia of speech is a motor speech disorder for reasons not yet fully understood. Children with apraxia of speech have difficulty planning and producing the precise, highly refined, and specific series of movements of the tongue, lips, jaw, and palate that are necessary for intelligible speech. Apraxia of speech, developmental apraxia of speech, or sometimes called verbal dyspraxia. She stopped. What? I don't understand. What's going on? Well, Ben's mom could not figure out what the information was asking, so she did go to the pediatrician, and she did get the help she needed, and now Ben is 7 and speaking fine. Another story involves Yusuf. This is Yusuf. He's Ben's grandfather. A few years ago, Yusuf began losing his memory and his ability to walk without falling. His daughter, Ben's mom, immediately assumed it was Alzheimer's. Why? Because Alzheimer's was in the news, there were campaigns about Alzheimer's, there was all this information about it. And with that assumption came the assumption that it was not treatable. So nobody in the family sought help for a few months, until Yusuf fell and ended up in the hospital. And that's when the family found out that actually what he had was NPH, normal pressure hydrocephalus. Raise your hand if anybody knows what normal pressure hydrocephalus is. Few people. So this is what normal pressure hydrocephalus is. NPH is an abnormal accumulation of cerebral spinal fluid, otherwise CSF, that causes the ventricles in the brain to become enlarged, sometimes with little to no increase of intracranial pressure, ICP. This is how it was explained to Yusuf's family by the neurologist. Yusuf's daughter, an educated woman in her 40s, found herself completely intimidated. In addition, a deluge of information began from neurologists, neurosurgeons, internists, home care services, nursing aides. Eventually, Yusuf also got the help he needed. But I share these two related stories with you because I think they're great examples of how health guides our everyday life and how health communication plays an integral role in the decisions that we make for ourselves and others. I also think the stories illustrate how personal and yet public health really is. Ben's mom and Yusuf's daughter is me, if you haven't figured that out yet. And both of these experiences happened after I got my PhD in health communication. And they happened in a family that was privileged, economically, educationally. We had all the access to the best pediatricians and neurologists, and we had access to all the communication channels. And yet there were disconnects between the way I was seeking information and getting that information and understanding it. And I still didn't have the confidence to say to an expert, wait a minute, I don't understand, go back, explain again. Now I want to share with you two case examples of public health communication efforts that also present how health communication can impact public health in positive ways. The first case is an example of a user-generated health movement, is what I'd like to call it, and it's called It Gets Better, the It Gets Better project. Raise your hand if you've heard of It Gets Better. Some of you. This project is only a year old, and it was created to inspire hope for young people who were being harassed and dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts. This was sort of the mission statement. This is kind of a mission statement that's on the website. Many LGBT youth can't picture what their lives might be like as openly gay adults. They can't imagine a future for themselves. So let's show them what our lives are like. Let's show them what the future may hold in store for them. After the website was first put up, the idea was that you and anybody you know could put up videos about how it gets better. I'm going to play this short video that summarizes what it's like.
High school was bad. I was obviously gay, and some kids didn't like that, and I did get harassed. What I'd love you to take away from it is that however bad it is now, it gets better, and it can get great.
And it's important for adults to reach out to kids and share our stories so that they can picture futures for themselves that are worth sticking around for.
Okay, little ones, here's the first thing you need to know. You are perfect and wonderful exactly as you are.
You're not alone.
There are a ton of us out here in this world.
We love you without even knowing you.
There's art to be made, and there are songs to be sung.
So hold on. Look at me, 80 years old. It gets better with age.
Listen to me.
It gets better.
It gets better.
It gets better.
It does get better.
So much better.
You'll be fine, partner.
Your life can be amazing, but you have to tough this period of it out and you have to live.
The ability for users to create meaning and health messages allowed this kind of communication effort to succeed. Okay, I'm going to do this right, aren't I? I'm not going to do this right. Okay. It's okay. Okay. All right. The second case is Text for Baby. Raise your hand if you've heard of Text for Baby. This is not a user-generated campaign. Instead, this is a campaign that was produced by the National Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition. And it was created also just last year to harness the power of the over 85% of Americans who own a cell phone and 72% of cell users who text. It offers free text messaging that is personal, timely, and particularly targeted to low-income women and adolescent pregnant women and other populations in the U.S. who are underserved. And it's through the website. They have a website. They have a Facebook page. They have a Twitter account. And they have a devoted YouTube channel. This is the one that doesn't work. Okay. Little technical difficulty here.
I've been doing this thing. I saw it like on TV the other day, and it was like Text for Baby, and you send the word baby to this number, and they like send you messages 3 times a week about like tips and stuff on taking care of the baby and everything.
We all know by this point, teen moms need all the help they can get. So for all the parents or expectant parents out there, there's a new program called Text for Baby. It's text number 4 baby. It sends a text message 3 times a week with all sorts of interesting advice, from thoughts on pregnancy to tips for new mothers.
So the ultimate goal is to make sure that we reduce infant mortality, that we increase the health of the children and the mothers through pregnancy.
Evaluation has shown that this campaign has already increased users' health knowledge, that users have more interactions with healthcare providers, use of health resources, adherence to their appointments more, increased immunizations, and an overall higher satisfaction with the program. So what do all these examples, combined with the research I've done in health communication, shown me about the future of health communication? First of all, audiences of health campaigns and user-generated health movements do not have to understand the science behind a health problem to act for themselves or to act for others. Second, health information changes really quickly. It's ubiquitous, it's fluid, and it's constantly recreated, not just by the professionals, but by individuals and communities via mass media and interpersonal communication at the same time. And third, health disparities persist in this country even though we've known about them for a very long time. We have mobile devices in the hands of 5 billion people worldwide, and we have the experts developing campaigns and information tools. When are we going to learn from the lessons like campaigns like It Gets Better and Text for Baby? So I end with questions, and I pose 3 of them more just to kind of provoke thought. They don't have to necessarily be answered today. First one is, how much scientific and medical information do audiences need to know to use the communication tools to make a difference in their health? Second, what else do you need to do to close the health communication divide that diminishes the potential of underserved communities to build their knowledge and make decisions? And finally, how do we combine what we've learned about user-generated health movements, mobile health messaging, and disparities to create a future for health information that improves health for all people? Thank you. And if you want to focus the discussion now, we could always just start with the first question and look at that, or the last question, whatever you find more compelling. Thank you.
Okay, so the way in which we have addressed these questions on other panels is to ask our futurists to step up on stage. They're getting quite a bit of exercise. To maybe look at one of these questions, or I can certainly repeat, or Linda can repeat one of the questions. And
actually, I wanted
to
ask a question. So only 3 text messages a week. I mean, I was a young mother, and even though I read every book I could get my hands on, it seems like 3 text messages a week wouldn't be a lot of information.
Well, I didn't create the campaign. I can only suspect that they did some research and they found that among these audiences, they're so busy and while they're texting all the time, they're not thinking about those kinds of issues in their life every moment. And to get them to even pay attention to 3 is a real boost in a lot of the ways that they're doing this. And so I think they didn't want to bombard them. Plus, I'm guessing, knowing a lot of the campaigns that I've developed and worked on the other end, resources probably prevented them from being able to constantly monitor incoming text messages, because this was a tailored campaign. So you put in your baby's due date and you get personalized messages about when you need to go for an appointment. They probably couldn't do that in terms of resources more than 3 times a week, I'm guessing.
Dan or Abdur?
That's a really cool program. I mean, so there's been like a common theme the entire week about how do we educate people about all the resources that are available, right? So there's lots of health information out there. People either A, are not looking or thinking about bringing, information to themselves to become smarter, to learn about these things, to become more involved. And it's all up and down the spectrum, right? It's not just the underserved communities. So it's like, this is a society problem rather than a technology problem.
I think you're completely right about that. So an interesting aspect of the stories you told was basically, person goes out and searches for information, they get something and they go, oh my gosh, and they don't think about how credible it is, how authoritative it is, and they don't know how to evaluate it, basically. So an interesting aspect of this theme of this future information is how do we teach people, or how do people figure it out that information comes with different qualities, and you have to know how to understand the credibility of that. One of the things I do a lot is I teach teachers how to do this kind of thing, and I recently taught a series of 5 classes in Southern California, each one with 50 teachers or librarians in the class. And the topic of the class was how to be a discerning consumer of credible or authoritative information. So 250 teachers and librarians. At the end of each class, I asked, how many of you Googled me before coming to the class? Basic thing, right? 0. 250 people who should have known better, because I could have been bozo, right? How would they know? So I think this is really a fundamental skill we need to have every person understand, especially for health stuff.
But Dan, it's not even credible information. They're not even asking the first question.
Right.
Like they don't even need credibility at that point. Like they need to ask the question.
It's a basic skill. You're
Even
right,
if
you're
they
right.
got the wrong answer, at least they asked.
Thank you very much. For the audience, you'll have time at the end of all the presentations to ask questions. And if you need to jot something down, you have note cards in front of you as reminders. And with that, let's thank Linda one more time. And I'll ask Bob to step up.
Get this so I don't disappear behind the podium. And what I'd like to talk about is a bit of a more technological issue that we face in terms of ensuring the safety of the food supply that we have, both within this country and internationally. And just to put it all in perspective, and what I'd like to do as I'm going through this discussion is basically break it into three components. What's the current situation? What is the problem? I would like to mention a little bit about a couple of thoughts on how the role of academics can play in finding solutions to this. And then finally, I'd like to give a specific question to our panelists. And so a little bit to keep this all in perspective, unless you are out there as a subsistence farmer, most of you go through a process of high degree of trust every day with the fact that you put food into your mouth that you have no idea where it was grown, how it was harvested, how it was processed, distributed, marketed, and in many cases, particularly if you're a student here, probably don't even know how it was prepared. So you're putting your faith in a lot of insights. I expected to hear some giggles in the back there. And so you're putting a huge amount of faith in both the industry and many segments of the industry and in terms of government agencies. So what I'd like to do is just put this a little bit in perspective and give you the situation and ask you, what do you know about the food you eat? And so the first question I always like to pose is, do you know where your food comes from? And interestingly, most people guess wrong for many foods. So for example, the first example I use is juice. And many of you had either apple juice or orange juice this morning with breakfast. So do you even know where your juice comes from? Well, the reality is if you would have guessed in terms of orange juice and said, oh, well, I get orange juice from Florida, yeah, you're probably correct part of the time. If you said I get my apple juice from Washington State, yeah, part of the time. But actually, the biggest supplier of orange juice to the U.S. consumer is actually Brazil. And apple juice comes from either China, which is the #1 supplier of apple juice, or Eastern Europe, or Chile. And so that would be one guess. And you got it partially right. Let's go a little further afield, seafood. Where do you think your seafood comes from? And of course, most people in the United States would say either somewhere down off the Gulf Coast, or possibly up and around Alaska. And in fact, if you looked at the top 5 providers of seafood, those two areas actually do contribute. But the major producers are actually the west coast of South America, the west coast of Africa, and the largest supplier of seafood is Asia and the Philippines. And so that's where most of our fish comes from. And then finally, the last one is spices. We don't even appear anywhere on this one. This is all basically foods that come from equatorial regions. We get most everything from Asia, a lot of them from Africa, and from South America. And so if you're eating those, you are involved in the international trade of food. And in fact, it is one of the interesting facts is the United States is one of the top largest exporters of food. It is also among the top largest importers of food. We get food from over 100 different countries, and we are doing that increasingly. We live in a world of a global food market. We move food all around the world to meet the consumer demands on a day-by-day basis. So, if I was to ask you as a consumer to go out and look at a commercial fast food hamburger, and I asked you, Well, where do you think that came from? And you started looking at the supply chain. So most people can start to pick that apart. This was what to a consumer might be a reasonable supply chain. And you'll see that you've got meat and cheese and the roll, and people will think maybe about the condiments, but they all bring those together. That's not how a professional looks at it. This is what the supply chain looks like if you are a professional food scientist. And these are all the ingredients that would go into that hamburger that you see up there in the top right hand. And so it is a science, it is not a culinary art, though that it certainly is part of it. But these are where these are the ingredients that are typically involved, and these come from all over the world. And this is a picture of what the world food market looks like if you're here in the United States. We start off with the farm, and there's about 2 million of them here in the United States, and there's about 7 million of them foreign farms that contribute to the food. And we go through this whole thing, and it gets down to finally there's about 1 million food markets in the country. And so you have a highly complex supply chain for which you make a mistake anywhere along that supply chain and you can get people sick. So it's a very complex system. And it's also a very diverse system. And this is one that sort of is the epitome to me, these two pictures, of the diversity that we see within the food system. Because on the left-hand side, this is a laser sorter that examines every peanut that goes down a chute and eventually will get into your peanut butter, or it will be in the dry roasted nuts that you have. It inspects them one at a time for color changes to see if they may be contaminated with molds. And this thing goes at such a rapid pace that you can't even see it. It's a blur of peanuts. But it's your primary safeguard for not getting contamination with aflatoxin, a highly carcinogenic compound that's produced by molds in peanuts. On the other side, in the right-hand side, this is what it looks like in the west coast of Africa, which is also a very large peanut-producing area, where they do the same thing. They're looking at the color of the peanuts and then removing those that have an off color, because that's a way to make sure that you get rid of the peanuts that might be mold contaminated. Both of them work approximately the same. Both of them are accepted means of sorting, but this is the epitome of the difference from highly technological to just above subsistence farming. So, how do you manage this kind of a global food chain if you were a major producer or even a small producer? How do you get involved if you have to trust suppliers that are literally coming from all over the world in order to make a safe food? Well, first off, you have to start thinking about systems and the intricacies of it. And you need knowledge and data. And there's a huge amount of knowledge and data that's generated around the world, essentially for every lot of food that's produced. And you have to ask a lot of questions. Where did the raw ingredients come from for that food? What were the conditions under which they were produced? What was the weather? What's the the agricultural workers that were actually producing it? What's the level of contamination that you can expect from these raw ingredients? Where were the ingredients stored and handled? How were they distributed? Under what conditions? Because they all can affect the safety of the product. How were the ingredients processed? What were the effectiveness of the prevention programs and intervention programs put into place as you bring all of these together and then manufacture a food and distribute it? This requires a huge diversity of expertise. It requires people that are knowledgeable in agricultural sciences, engineering, microbiology, chemistry, packaging, economics, behavioral sciences, communication specialists, climatology, public health, policies, they just go communications, it goes on and on and on and on and on. And the problem is that most of these people do not talk to each other. And so it's hard to get these, and actually one of the things that is always very valuable in this situation is the people that sit at the interface and actually translate that into decision-making processes for major corporations, for regulatory agencies, or even for purchasing agents at medium-sized companies. This is further complicated by the fact that the supply chain is highly segmented. Even within agricultural production, it's segmented into who owns the land, who grows the crop, because it's not always the landowner that is actually the producer of the crop. There's a lot of renting of land. The harvesters, particularly in a large-scale operation, are private companies. That's what they do. We have packers that put them into the right shipping containers, move them around to different companies. Once you get into food processing, you're dealing with multiple ingredients, branded products, co-packers, again, highly segmented. Distribution systems, when a food leaves a manufacturing plant and it's put on a truck, it belongs to the transport company. They have the responsibility for it until it's delivered at the next segment. So we have a player that probably has very little expertise in food that now takes the responsibility for shipping it. Marketing, you have multiple levels of wholesale and retail marketing. Preparation, we eat over 50% of the food that we eat here in the United States is prepared outside the home. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not consumed in the home, but a lot of it is actually prepared outside the home and brought into it. Now, as I already indicated, there's a great deal of information generated about all the different aspects of foods by those different segments of the industry. However, there is very little information flow that goes from segment to segment, and very much a limited amount of that information flows to regulatory agencies that have responsibility for oversight. There's a lot of reasons for this. Proprietary concerns. I don't want to have the company next to me know what my secret sauce is, what the ingredients of. There are regulatory concerns about regulatory agencies going to places where the industry may not want them to. We have lack of informatics infrastructure. And one of the things that I've always amazed, because I figured once I left government and I knew what their informatics problems were there, I figured all these companies have at their corporate headquarters the ability to push a button and they know exactly what things are going on throughout their system at the touch of their fingerprints. No, it's not true. They have as much of an informatics infrastructure problem. And so we have a lack of expertise, particularly when you're talking about small to medium-sized companies. So just quickly, how can academia help? Well, part of the problem is the way academia is structured. And I might note that I've been very encouraged coming to the University of Maryland that has gone to a great deal of effort to make sure that there are a lot of centers and institutes that actually try to bridge the stovepipes that are often represented in traditional academic structures. We have a lot of drivers pushing us to this kind of interaction. And then finally, you have to consider what's being rewarded, because are we rewarding people that are interested in transdisciplinary programs? And we're seeing a shift, but it's one that's always hard. Okay, so I'm going to leave this commercial on for our institute, and I'm going to pose the question that I have to our panel, and took the time to write it out so I don't get it wrong, is how do you handle worldwide information that is highly diverse and largely unstructured in a real-time basis to predict problems and make decisions that help ensure the safety of the food supply? Because there is a very large industry out there that is just dying to find the answers. And so I pose that to you.
Okay. Do our panelists have that question in mind? Answers?
Great question, Dan.
I knew that was coming. Well, one of the things Google is pretty good at, and all the search engines being included are really good at, is extracting reasonably unstructured text from the body of stuff that's out there on the web. So one of the tools you probably know about at Google is the flu trends, right? So one of the things we do with flu trends and with the Correlate products is look at what's going on in the world and look for indicators and signifiers of that. So for example, we can tell that an outbreak of flu is happening before the CDC knows about it. So you can imagine an analogous thing for various kinds of, food safety issues. You can imagine building a tool like that that would look for spikes in, say, outbreaks of E. coli or related symptoms. So I think there are tools like that that could be built. And I think, another issue that comes up is in country of origin labeling, right? So we've got this huge problem where we can pass laws that say we actually need to have all of our food labeled as to where it comes from in order to give people the information so they can make choices about what it is they're going to do with their food. And yet, we have this complex welter of, we live in a complex system. We live in a complex legal and regulatory ecosystem where we may not have the ability to actually do what it is we want. And I think that's probably true for all of this stuff. So we can look at the information, we can extract it, we can analyze it. Whether or not we can regulate it is a different issue.
Another thing is, I'm thinking that through this food chain, more and more likely it's going to be that people will have mobile devices along the way, right? So if there was some kind of system where you could propagate the information through mobile phones, that could also be very useful, I guess.
The U.S. food supply is pretty good compared to anywhere else in the world. And I think what that's led is a compliance or a complacency of individuals to not care. It's good enough that they don't see a problem. And so you say, this thing about reward, well, most of the consumers are already rewarded and they've got a pretty good food supply. You're not seeing lots of outbreaks of E. coli. They happen, but comparatively, we're doing a pretty good job.
In our roles as futurists,
I'm throwing it out there. That was like everyone, okay, we have a problem, and I always like to say, well, do we really have a problem? Is it real or perceived?
Does it matter?
Does it matter?
I mean, if the consumer perceives that there is a problem, there is a problem.
Do consumers perceive there's a problem?
Very much so. The other issue is, and I appreciate your comments and actually use your approach in terms of identifying early outbreaks. But remember, the focus here is to prevent outbreaks. And the impact on the economy, whenever you have one of these outbreaks, for example, the listeria outbreak that is taking place now in cantaloupe, that will depress the sale and distribution of cantaloupe worldwide for probably a period of 2 years. So the focus here is being able to predict ahead of time. And there's some indications that you can actually do it, but it's the complexity of the situation and how do you gather the data and then evaluate it in an appropriate manner.
So I think the tools...
Cheaply, because the other issue I wanted to bring up is if right now, if a problem occurred, the source of a problem was in Africa, we wouldn't know because they just don't have the communication systems that the rest of the world has.
So I think that this is going to be a fascinating topic to follow up on at the end of all the presentations. Dan, unless you
I have a 30
something in real quick.
30-second real quick thought. I actually wanted to build on Mary's comment about having mobile devices that can look at things and track them and understand it. Imagine a world where every article, every item of food that you eat actually has a little tiny laser code on it. So when the peanuts are going through the peanut sorter, a little laser puts in a barcode on it and says what time it went through the sorter and where it's from. And then you could actually take your phone, your device, and point it at the item of food and get the whole audit trail of that individual peanut. Think about that as a future, right?
Let's thank Bob again. Now we have Carol.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about speech in our lives because I direct the Speech Communication Lab here at the University of Maryland, where we study all aspects of speech, and we process speech in various ways to pull out different types of information for various reasons. And I'm going to talk in particular about three projects that we have going on. Probably all of you all now have at least heard about Siri, the new dialogue system that's on the iPhone 4S that has really been a big positive push in speech technology. However, there's definitely still room for improvement to make that even better. Now I'm going to compare sort of human speech recognition with automatic speech recognition systems performance. And here we're comparing just the error rates for spontaneous speech. And you can see that for automatic speech recognition systems, it's an order of magnitude greater than what a human would do. And I'm going to talk about one of the reasons why this is a problem. And then also, we can see the effect of noise on automatic speech recognition systems. It's much more deleterious than it is in human speech recognition. Okay, so first, I'll just give a little demo of the technology that we've developed that has evolved into OmniSpeech, and this came out of my laboratory. And this is a purely software solution to reduce background noise in speech signals. And it only requires one microphone. And we hope that this will help people get information better, especially in noisy situations. So I'm just going to play, in the interest of time, I'm just going to play two of these demos. So first, you're going to hear speech with a clicking sound that we got from a company that does first response.
December and January are nice months to spend in Miami.
Continental drift is a geological theory.
His shoulder felt as if it were broken.
That noise problem grows more annoying each day.
And now this is after our technology.
December and January are nice months to spend in Miami.
Continental drift is a geological theory.
His shoulder felt as if it were broken.
That noise problem grows more annoying each day.
And now I'll show something that's really different. I'll tell you that you're going to hear two people talking, although you can only hear one of them slightly.
The fight will end in just 6 minutes.
I don't even know if you can hear the second speaker. Okay, so now we're going to pull out the prominent speaker.
The fight will end in just 6 minutes.
And now I'm going to pull out the background speaker.
Grace makes up for lack of beauty.
So you can hear him now, although you can still hear some leakage of her, but if you needed to understand what he said, you can. And of course, if the signal-to-noise ratio was even better, we can get rid of some of the leakage that you're hearing. Okay, so now that's dealing with the noise problem. I'm going to go back to that problem of spontaneous speech and why automatic speech recognition systems aren't doing nearly as well as humans are. And a key problem is what we call co-articulation in speech. This happens all the time. It's not something that you can get rid of. So you have to build effective models to deal with co-articulation. And what co-articulation is just the influence of one sound on another. When we speak, we often anticipate sounds. We overlap sounds to varying degrees of strength, just depending upon how clearly we are articulating or how relaxed we are and casual we are when we articulate. Current ASR systems model co-articulation using these things called diphones, triphones, or quinphones, though triphones are the most popular ones. So let me explain what a triphone is. Here is the word perfect memory, and this is just a monophone transcription of that word. So you see the vertical lines, that's telling you where those different sounds supposedly occur when we transcribe them, because we transcribe sounds as if they're beats on a string, when they actually overlap quite a bit. But okay, this would be a monophone transcription of the word perfect memory. Now what a triphone system does is you still have the same time spans for those segments that you're going to use to build your acoustic models for those sounds, but you note the context. So instead of just here, I say this is preceded by P and followed by F, okay? And so I won't just have one model in my speech recognition system. I have a lot of models depending upon the context to help me deal with recognition. The variability that occurs, this overlap. And this was a huge move. I mean, it was a really important step in terms of improving the performance of speech recognition systems. However, I think it still leaves too much information on the table, and I'll explain why. But one of the problems with the triphone systems is you can have data sparsity problems. Typical database, if you just had those monophones, there are only about 60 of them, say, in English. But if you go to triphones, now you got over 9,000 models that you have to build, okay? And then you're only considering the immediate context, okay, just the sound preceding and the sound following, and that's a problem. And then, as I said, the time instant is the same as a monophone. You're just denoting the context. Okay, now let me explain why that is a problem. Okay, so my point is we're leaving too much information on the table. Let me just first say, this is a study that was done comparing 8 of the top speech recognition systems that we have that have been developed over many, many decades, very, very sophisticated systems. And they went and looked at the phone error rate versus the word error rate. And the phone error rate is still at like 35 to 55%. Although the word error rate is a whole lot better because we got all this natural language processing. You know, we can say what is the probability that this word occurs given the previous word. And that helps out tremendously. And a lot of our research in the past few decades has focused mainly on that natural language processing because we don't do the phone error. I mean, we have a large phone error, so we have to have that natural language processing. A lot of my work has concentrated on actually improving that phone error rate because you can see they're correlated. If the phone error rate is higher, then the word error rate is also higher. Okay, so I gotta speed through this. So I'm just gonna give you a diagram of core articulation. And I'm gonna use the American English R sound. And it's this sound right here. You can see this is a spectrogram, this is time. Oops. And then this, oh geez, I don't know why that's happening. This is time on the horizontal. Maybe so, huh. Okay, this acoustic cue of this very low third band of energy here is what's distinct about an R. Okay, time here, frequency here, and these dark bands tell you how the energy is distributed. And so you get this low third resonant frequency for an R. Okay, now let's look at the word African. And again, let's look at that third resonant frequency. Now when I transcribe this sound, I have to say that the R is over here. But you see that lowering happening all the way back over here because the person can anticipate this sound, let me just go from here. Early, even before they go into the F, which is this region, they're already saying the R, okay? So we have this core articulation that's going on, yet if I did a triphone model, these are the segments in my triphone model. For this R, I would only be looking at this little piece here and not considering the fact that the whole gesture for this R started all the way over here in my triphone model. And if I looked at the I would only be looking at this piece followed by the F and not denoting the fact that this R over here is affecting the production of this I. So that's the problem with the triphone model. And what we find is that articulatory gestures generally take about 200 milliseconds. I've done studies to go in and to measure this. And my studies, as well as others, confirm basically that it takes about that long to produce a gesture. So we really need to be looking over a much larger time span. So this was a project that I did with several colleagues across several universities. It was a beautiful collaboration and produced what we think is some very significant work on modeling core articulation. I'm going to have to go through this fast because how much time do I have, Ira? Okay, great. Okay, so, I don't even think you can see the waveforms. Can you see waveforms here? Sorry about that. You're only seeing the boxes. Well, since I got 5 minutes, let me back up a little bit. Okay, so here's someone saying perfect memory. Again, this is the spectrogram, and unfortunately, you probably can't see the time waveform. But what I'm showing you underneath are trajectories showing how the tongue body is moving as you say this sound. Here's the tongue body. How the tongue tip is moving as you say this sound, and the difference between your lips, the upper and lower lips, and how that's changing as you say this sound. And in this case, it's very clearly articulated. You see a little T burst here that goes with this tongue tip coming up. closure here because of the K, there's that gesture, and then the lip gesture for the M. So we're concentrating on the KTM area. Now let me contrast that, and I'm just going to contrast that with the fast repetition of this sound. And if you could see the waveform, what you would see is that this looks like a totally different animal, this region in here where the KTM are said. You don't have this nice T burst like you have here occurring here. There's no silence here. And that's because the gestures are all still made, but now they're just overlapping. And in traditional speech recognition systems, we would say that those sounds were deleted. But they really are not deleted because the gestures are still there. So this going to a gestural representation gives us a more invariant representation of the speech signal as opposed to going from the acoustic signal. So that was dissertation work done by one of my students where we went from the acoustics down to these movements of the articulators. We explored a lot of different machine learning techniques, and the key point is that we tried window sizes for estimating these gestures from 20 milliseconds up to 300. And the one that worked optimally was 170 milliseconds, much longer than a triphone would give you. We also went from acoustics to gestures. And again, the important point, these are different techniques, but the important point was optimal recognition came at very long window sizes, sizes that would capture a full gesture. Okay, so here's when I'm taking that fast repetition of perfect memory and putting it into our system versus what we had with real articulatory data. Now this is automatically generated. This is a region that you would typically say the K and the T aren't even produced, and our system could uncover that those sounds had actually been produced. And that's pretty significant that we could get there. And so we put this in a speech recognition engine, used the dynamic Bayesian network where the gestures were hidden. But the point I want to make is comparing this to not using gesture information, long windows, versus using gestures in long windows. We got a almost 14% drop in phone error rate. Our error rate was 37.57%. This is a thesis that was just finished compared to this 39 to 55% you're getting from state-of-the-art speech recognition systems. And I think it's just because we're better modeling the core articulation that's in the speech signal. It was a very successful collaboration because we were all great people. And we used all of the tools that you have available to you to communicate because we're across like 5 universities. And we want to continue to work together. Okay, so our next move based on this research is we want to build a pronunciation tool. Since we can get at the gestures, what people are doing when they talk, we want to help American English first learners learn how to produce very complicated sounds. Also, we want to help L2 learners, foreigners who are coming here to speak American English, reduce their foreign accents possibly to be more comprehensive. And my question to you guys, your futurists, is somehow we're going to have to come up with an effective audio-visual tool to display this kind of information to listeners. And I don't think this is very straightforward because people aren't aware of what they're doing when they speak. You don't think about what you're doing with your tongue tip relative to your tongue body. So how to get people to, how to come up with a visualization that will help people easily figure out what they're doing wrong and then being able to correct it. And it's not just in terms of these gestures, but also prosody is going to be a big part of this. But they both boil down to, whether you're talking about prosody or you're talking about making these gestures, to a timing issue. And so being able to get this kind of timing information across is going to be really important. So give Mary, I know you're into visualization. I would love to hear from all of you, but particularly since you're into that, how we might go about doing that. Okay.
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure you've already thought of this one, so, I only had 1 minute to think, but, is, you know, a 3D visualization of the human, the whole rig, right? The whole mouth and all the structures within. But it has to be semi-transparent so you can see everything, right? And then also a 3D model, maybe using the Kinect or something like that, of the user and how the user's articulating. And what you'd want to highlight in the visualization is the diff, right? The difference between the two models. The thing I'm worried about is if you were following a model like that or a visualization like that, I'm worried you would really have to slow it down a lot, and that might cause problems with the prosody effort you're talking about. So maybe with practice you could start to speed it up, you know, use a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing if they start to miss it because it's going too fast or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could just even simplify it down just to the facial expressions, some kind of like simplification of that. Because like, it seems like it's really hard to think about what your tongue is doing, but you can look at someone else's face and try to maybe mimic those.
I think the tongue's pretty critical, though.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It is huge.
I mean, do you think about your tongue when it's moving?
No, I don't think about my tongue.
That's the problem, that you don't think about it. So how do you get people to easily manipulate it when it's not something you think about?
Well, Mary, earlier you showed this, I'm not sure what to call it, the intradental transducer for the wheelchair guy. Could that be
I would
used in
never
some
have
way?
called it that.
I'm not sure what to call it, right? The
That's
thing
a good
in your
name.
mouth. The retainer, the retainer
UI.
UI.
Tongues to get articulatory data. That's not so much the issue. The issue is we can figure out what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
How to show them what they need to do right.
Could you use that to give them feedback? So maybe like a little bit of electro stimulus back.
I was thinking
I wasn't
more of
going
a
to say
buzz,
shock,
but
in terms of the audio part, what we're excited about is that we're going to try to synthesize what they did in their own voice and feed that back to them, because there are some studies that say if you hear yourself, it's much easier for you than if you're listening to some other.
Or at least a speech model that's near your native thing, and then show how it would be transformed. So you could actually imagine a sequence of transformations from the way you're speaking now towards the dialect version that you want to speak, right? And so you have a smooth audio progression that would allow you to say, oh, that's an easy step to make, as opposed to, say, the LR transformation from Japanese to English, right? That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
But if you could hear intermediate steps, which could be easily synthesized, then you could imagine hearing those intermediates.
Great idea. I hadn't thought about doing the intermediates. Yeah.
Who's the group, was it 2 days ago, that were looking at the various dialects?
Oh, yes, the
You know,
artists.
it'd be interesting if like you could get like those people trying to teach dialects involved.
Well, we're trying to get kind of rid of them, but yeah. But you're right. We both are interested in these dialects, though.
Those Brooklyn accents need to stay.
Well, they do have
We don't want to lose that culture.
No, we don't. But we just want them to still be able to produce those sounds in English that they don't have in their languages. They can keep the accent, just learn how to produce these sounds, right?
So this is another topic that we can come back to at the end of all the presentations.
Okay,
and
thank
once
you.
again, if the audience has questions on this subject, please jot them down, and you'll have an opportunity to ask the panelists.
You already did
Let's
it.
thank
Sorry.
Carol one more time. And our last speaker of the morning is Dr. Margaret Palmer. Margaret.
Well, so first I have to say, we don't just need to worry about the Brooklyn accents, but the Southern accents are also very important to maintain. Having grown up in the South. Yeah. You'll be able to tell. So one of the interesting differences between what I'm going to talk about and a lot of what you've heard is exciting results of work that's gone on at centers and by groups for a long time. I'm going to tell you about a project. Literally, the funding has been here for about 6 weeks, and it's a $60 million 10-year project from the National Science Foundation to the university to do really a big experiment to see if we can make leaps forward in solving problems at the interface of people and the environment. We call it the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, short for SSENC, or that's long for SSENC. And the mission is I'll just focus on the functioning, sustainability, and structure of socio-environmental systems, and I'll come back to that. First, I should probably explain, what do I mean by a socio-environmental system? Well, basically, it's the recognition that scientists have done a lot of work, environmental scientists, and have made major progress in understanding a lot of problems which have not, in fact, resulted quite often, or most often, in changes in behaviors or policies that will help to solve some of those problems. So what we're learning is that the relationship between what people do, the decisions they make, policies, whether or not they're regulations, their laws, or their markets, such as the massive emerging environmental markets, structures institutionally, governance structures, or informal institutions, like how people interact. Those kinds of things are tightly coupled with the natural world in ways that influence human well-being. So, for example, if you just consider the coupled system as consisting of a social template and a biophysical template, ecosystem features, for example, the presence of a forest, and ecological processes like the rate of carbon sequestration, together influence things that people need, like clean water, fuel, fiber, that influence their quality of life. That quality of life, in turn, is going to influence behaviors, decisions, etc. And just to give you an example, let's imagine a system, and actually this is going on right now, in which what we're seeing is major continuing changes in the movement patterns of people. We're starting to see mega cities develop. We're simultaneously starting to see shrinking cities like Detroit, where people are moving out of cities and leaving infrastructure behind. Well, let's talk about the case of increasing urbanization, some of which has been brought on directly by policies that have promoted infill, assuming that environmental sprawl is a bad thing because you're disturbing little parts of the landscape all over. Well, one of the impacts this has had, there have been many, has been that the policies that have been set up to protect the environment allow you, for example, to damage or even destroy water resources such as streams, wetlands. The person or the group that destroys that, let's say a new Walmart is built, although I don't want to beat up on Walmart, it could be a new housing subdivision, have to mitigate for those impacts. And so let's say they destroyed a number of wetlands in order to build more around the city center. To mitigate for that, they are now allowed to create wetlands, to replace those. Well, because of the market, land is cheaper in rural areas, so those created wetlands tend to be done in rural areas, not near the city center where they were previously. Well, a couple of results are coming out of that. One, what we're starting to see, of course, is major losses in all those aquatic resources in concentrated areas that already have problems with heat island effects due to all the asphalt, with NOx and SOx, various kinds of air pollutants, etc. The processes that go on in those wetlands are influenced by two things, not just the presence of the wetland, and we now know created wetlands aren't functioning like natural ones, but secondly, how they're aggregated in space, if they are close together, if they are linked, versus if they are widely spread apart. So both the loss of those and then the redistribution and the changes in how they function, do they actually remove the nitrogen? Do they sequester carbon even if they're moved out? Have led to major problems that can influence, for example, if it's a coastal city, degraded fisheries, increases in temperature, air pollution, which in turn can feed back to things like an increase in rates of asthma among small children in cities, decreases in recreational opportunities, etc. So this is a good example of how tightly all this is linked. Well, so at places like most academic institutions and the National Science Foundations, we have all these stovepipes. We have the environmental scientists. Not only that, we have the biologist in a separate division from the geochemists, in a separate division from another group that's important within the natural sciences, the computational people. What we proposed to NSF was to actually try to bridge all these disciplines that are necessary to address these kinds of problems. And we did propose this in a way that would involve doing synthesis research. So this is a socio-environmental synthesis center. That's a specific kind of research that doesn't involve new field experiments and going out with probes and measuring gas emissions. It relies on the fact that there is a plethora of data around. It's all over the place, some easy to access, some very difficult to access, and it's being vastly underused. So in fact, we would be spending, in a way, wasting money to continue to produce a lot of data, at least in those areas where there is adequate data there. So synthesis research is research in which data, ideas, and theories are all brought together and they're integrated in ways that they haven't been previously. The idea is that this may create not only new disciplines, but help open up paths for solving problems in ways that have not been solved before. Now, so what is the synthesis center, which is what we have? Well, literally, the university just finished renovating our space about a week ago. It's built in a way to deal with the experiment NSF wants us to undertake to see if we can facilitate all these disciplines coming together, working together effectively, and two, dealing with the information flow. So the way these synthesis centers work is the problems aren't going to be solved just by University of Maryland scholars. In fact, most of them won't be. We will provide funds to bring scholars from any discipline anywhere in the world to the center to work in a think tank type setting with one another. They may be there for a week, once a week, every 6 months. They may be a visiting scholar that's in residence for a year. We'll have postdoctoral fellows. Highly diverse disciplines. So we're used to, 10 years ago to me, a multidisciplinary group was me as a stream ecologist working with a hydrologist and a geomorphologist. That's nothing like the kind of transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary work we're talking about now. We're talking about me working with a social psychologist, for example. The focus of this is what's called actionable, and that is we want to co-develop the critical questions that will be the focus of research and that we'll put out call for proposals on with the policymakers or those that influence people. So it might be business leaders, it might be NGOs, influence people in ways that impact the behavior and in turn their quality of life. So what are some of the challenges we're facing? And one of the nice things about being able to speak today is I'm literally asking the broader community, not just today to provide input about how some of these problems can be solved, but to consider coming to the center with ideas and testing those out. So some of the issues are not going to surprise you. Highly distributed databases. We're dealing with scientific subcultures where among the ecological community, most of their databases are relatively small, and they're in Excel spreadsheets or Access. On the other hand, they need to couple that with real-time data coming from sensors in aquatic systems, for example, and they need to be able to couple that with highly qualitative data that's come from surveys or ethnographic work. Very, very heterogeneous data that has to be put together. We also have issues that applying technologies that'll help us better understand problems. I would say probably 75% of what we do is going to be spatially explicit. That is, those data will exist, be specific to certain places, and if you can think of a GIS type image, there will be rules that govern how things move between spaces, but they'll also be temporally dynamic. Can we use new visualization methods to do experiments on different policies that might influence that? So the questions that I would like to leave the group with are really related to these two issues, but I'm going to add the third that I just mentioned. One, questions related to how can we best deal with such highly heterogeneous data sets? And by that I mean, totally different meta-languages. Groups here creating ways to deal with their data that, maybe an EML type approach, an XML type approach, and those are much more compatible than other ways that data can be dealt with. But the second question I want to address to you is the incredible epistemological challenges we have. These groups of people are not used to working together, and it's very difficult. Just to give you an example, even among the leaders that put together this proposal, and it's several people from multiple universities, there's 8 of us, we had major problems identifying the first theme we were going to invite the community, the international community, to apply, to come to our center to work on, over simple words. We were trying to describe how the movement of people influences environmental issues, and we had a very specific kind of thing in mind. But the social scientists had problems with the term movement. The ecologists had problems with the term migration. The other groups suggested dispersal, which had very specific meanings to certain groups. Never mind the fact that our center is called one that is focused on actionable science. The first talk we gave about this center in Germany a few weeks ago, 2 ecologists raised their hand and said, actionable means litigation. Is this center all about, developing ideas to litigate? No, in the sociological scientific subculture, that actionable means creating knowledge to influence some outcome. So ideas about that, and then secondly, we have huge problems, really, instead of provenance, it's the idea of a proprietary. People don't want to let go of their data and make it freely available. And that's been a huge issue. It's a social issue, I realize, but it's something that we really need to address if we want to move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So several questions there.
A lot of different things you could address.
Open data.
Okay.
It's a good idea.
Why don't I invite all the panel guests to join on stage at this point?
Please join us.
Bob, come on, Carol.
So open data would be great, but in the scientific
Well,
community,
I mean, so
where do you get your credit?
Scientific experiments should be reproducible. You need that data to reproduce someone else's experiment, or at least their answers. You just have to force them and put it into the grant that they have to make it available.
So you think
Right.
the stick is the option?
Like the funding agencies need to actually make all this stuff available. I also applaud a lot of the universities that are trying to push that when papers are published that they're freely available to everyone. Like hiding behind even the ACM digital library just irritates the hell out of me, right?
Yeah, I just published a paper in a journal, shall remain unnamed, and they wanted $5,000 for open access version. And it drove me insane because it's basically extortion.
It's total extortion. You know what? Like, it's other grants paying for all the research, other people with all their time and energy. Like, the editorial boards are free. Like, all those people are donating their time, and then some publisher wants to make money off of it.
But I think your call for open data is really, really an important one because, I'll tell you a small story. We had a PhD candidate come by, he's just finished his thesis. He was giving his talk, and at the very beginning of his talk, he says, "Oh, here's my website with all my data on it." I thought, yes. The guy next to me downloaded the data while the speaker was speaking. He gave the result, his design of his algorithm during the talk, and my buddy sitting next to me reproduced the entire thing in MATLAB. Reran the thesis on the data, got a different answer. Okay?
Oh, no.
No, that's awesome.
This is totally great.
This is what we should be doing.
And what happened is that the first question he raised his hand and said, very, very kindly, I have a different answer. What happened? Why? And they had a conversation which accelerated the scientific process significantly, right? That would have been impossible under the closed model. So it's important.
I agree. The
right?
issues that have to be approached, though, are, first of all, there's currently no system for acknowledging how difficult it is to produce a data set and make it widely available. So you don't get credit for it. Tenures based on publications, on ownership, et cetera. So it's a social issue.
You can get citations, right? So you publish a paper that explains the data set. There's tons of workshops for that, or even a technical report. And then at least you can get some citation and references of people using your data set.
I would argue that the whole reward structure needs to change.
I would agree with that. It'd be nice to know ways to accelerate that.
Was this an NSF grant?
It was in-
There's should be a microphone.
Carol,
you
you
can
It was
share.
NSF, yes.
Behind you.
I was just going to say, because recently, because we just submitted a proposal, they now make you put a statement in there about data sharing and saying how you're going to share all the tools and the data that you collect, trying to get at this whole
Yeah.
issue of people, you know, collecting stuff, but then not sharing it so that the whole community can benefit, so.
Right, we'll see how well that goes. I'm really familiar with that. It'll
I
take
don't
10
know
years or
what you
more.
can do to
Yeah.
enforce it, but.
Well, to
Well,
strike
it's
a-
Well, it's
Probably.
easy to enforce. Don't give them any more money.
That's
Well,
right.
I mean, but NSF has to know that they're not doing it, and maybe, I don't know if investigators are gonna wanna call up and tell NSF, look, they didn't do, you know, because
next
you
Email.
get
funding,
in.
you have
There's
to
all
show
kinds
proof.
of public ways to like share.
So at this point, I'd like to have the futurists have the opportunity to ask the faculty panelists questions that have come to mind while watching their presentations, issues about opportunities and remaining challenges for science and society with information.
Well, one of the students tweeted something that I thought was very apparent, was that there was a theme throughout at least 3 of the talks. Unfortunately, you didn't fit in the theme, but there was a theme about using community to transfer information, open data, and methods. I think some of the methods that you brought up as the first speaker actually could be used across all the panelists.
And following up on that, it seemed that one of the themes were what barriers exist between different groups and organizations, government, industry. You mentioned about having early response by Twitter feeds or Google that could respond faster than any government agency. How receptive is a government agency to be receiving information from industry that is alerting to these events in real time? Or is there
isn't
collaboration?
government really a tool for us? Isn't it supposed to make our lives better as citizens? So, I mean, it's going to take all of us working with our own government to make sure those things actually happen.
Well, another variation on that theme would be a question for the other folks in the panel, would be what are the major communication mechanisms that you use to get your messages out? I know you write papers, don't tell me about that. What are the other mechanisms you use to get your message out? Because a lot of the panelists, a lot of the talks have been, we have all this knowledge. How can we get the world to change? What do you do to get the world to change, to follow your mission, your set of ideas?
Well, what we're trying to do is an experiment in involving the people we want to get the message to from the start. That is, in defining, helping us co-define exactly how the research will be done so that it best meets their needs, so they'll care about the information.
So, how many blogs do you guys write? How often do you guys participate in forming virtual groups?
Well, we just
Like,
we're opening in January.
You know, but I mean,
yeah.
I've seen whole companies get started in less time than that and do a whole myriad of these techniques and bring things together and do all kinds of stuff. I mean, you started in January, it's November. Like, I would expect a lot of progress.
Your venture capital funding.
I would be actually cutting you off at this point. I'd be like, we have to cut our losses.
We have some audience questions here that want to jump in. Is that, if that's okay with you, Larry? Is that
Absolutely.
okay, here we go. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm Lucinda Fleeson. I'm at the College of Journalism. I have a question about the future of mobile health. To follow up on the text for babies, I heard a presentation by an economist who wrote a report for the World Bank earlier this year saying that the totality of mobile health applications right now is only about $10 million globally, and that it's mostly sustained by philanthropy. And I'm just wondering, you know, what's going to happen there? It seems like such a no-brainer of a good solution, but it doesn't seem to be going to the next step.
Okay.
I can't answer in terms of maybe the technological engineering aspects of it. I can only answer in terms of what I see and hear. And there are dozens of mobile health campaigns going on in local nonprofits, community organizations, that kind of thing. I think the reason why it hasn't taken off as even faster, although I think it is pretty fast, is because resources have not been provided to the producers of the mobile health campaigns. I don't think it's been that the audiences haven't picked it up or wanted to use their mobile devices for health, so much as not enough money has been going into funding these kinds of programs. We're trying to start something at the School of Public Health. And for a campaign to be tailored, to really be specific, to be responsive to questions that might come in, you have to have staff. And you have to have the skill and the ability to understand what they're asking and how to use that system. But then somebody has to be there. So you could do automated messages, but then how fast is that going to get obviously boring and stale? So to make it tailored and to keep it going, you need staff, you need resources, you need space, you need technology. And I'm guessing that not enough funding has gone to that opportunity yet.
I'm wondering, in many of these instances, whether the people that have designed these systems have built in the metrics that actually allow them to determine if they're having an impact. And many of them, because they're resource limited, haven't really thought through the process that sooner or later somebody's going to want to know, is all this effort having a difference? And I think that it would be getting some help in that area. What are the metrics that they should be following to prove that they're having an impact?
The evaluation that I provided you was a study on the Text for Baby campaign. And again, these campaigns are only a year old. When you said January to November, I mean, that's how long they've been going. Evaluation efforts have only now been 3 months old, 4 months old, and it was just released literally November 1, the first major evaluation on Text for Baby, and that's where I was able to provide you those kinds of impacts. So you're right, it takes a while.
There was feedback before that. So you started
general
seeing,
feedback.
You saw how many people were starting to use it, how many text messages were going out.
Right.
Like you're starting to see those initial metrics. So metrics evolve over time. Like
And
the first one, like people are going to the website, first thing.
Right.
Second, they're signing up. So you're already getting immediate feedback that this is at least making, like someone cares enough to sign up and to send the first text message.
Absolutely right. And that those measures of reach in terms of those are often measured. It's the measures on the health outcomes that I'm thinking of in terms
but you've already started, what I'm, like, to his point, you're already starting to say, here's some initial metrics. Right. We just started, here's what we saw. Here's what we saw. We validated that someone cares. We validated that more people are signing up every month. We validated that they're continuing to get these messages, they haven't turned them off. Right, you can walk through these steps and then say, okay, now that we've had the first generation of these kids out there, let's go do a study. Like you can build these things up, and that's really more like just-in-time research. Like you should be publishing stuff every day about your research. You should be bringing people into these folds all the time. Like you go to these startups and they're writing blogs every day about all the engineering challenges that they're working on. They get other companies to help them, and like they're so collaborative, even though that they're trying to make money and not be collaborative at the same time. And academia needs to take some of those lessons and bring them in here instead of being silos. Now, by the way, this is the first time I've ever been to a forum like this with this many disciplines, and I would like to thank our host. This is amazing.
Let's get in another question.
I have a question over here.
Over here. Well, we have one here first, and then let's go to that question.
Half question, half comment. This is for the first presenter primarily. Very cool idea, by the way. I think it fits perfectly within the trend of people really wanting to empower themselves with health information. And also delivering with a text medium is great because it eliminates the problem of people who don't have smartphones, maybe in a less economically advantageous position, having still mobile access, they can get this information. But primarily the problem that we've hit on in that discussion was health education. And there's a trend of people really trying to learn about nutrition, how to take care of themselves, exercise. There's a wave of that happening, especially in this country. And I'd hate to put the onus of any type of activism on Google or Microsoft, but you guys are the primary means, at least for me, and I know a lot of other people in this country, for getting information. And one point that was brought up is people aren't even asking the first question, but they do ask other questions. And they ask it through your medium, they ask it through Aardvark, they ask it through mobile mediums, they ask it on Facebook. So when they're asking other questions, present them with this information so they know that they have other things they need to learn as well. This is important to people, and I think that giving them as many avenues to enter into that information, enter into that discussion is really, really important. And I also agree with Abdur. These startups are really producing this information and being very collaborative in how they're advancing their work in their various fields. In academia, we're not doing that. In research fields, we're not doing that. And it's not being applied to the health space all that much. Startups with little resources, they need to do this. Everybody else can do this too, they just don't see the value in it yet.
Your question.
So that was my comment, and I just would love a response.
Okay. Any response?
Well, yeah, one quick comment from the search engine's perspective is one of the things we see a lot of is people doing questions, asking a question like, chest pain. I kind of know what to tell you if you're having chest pain. But we know that one of the things that people do a lot in medical searches is they search by proxy. That means that their husband is having the chest pain right now. And so from the browser perspective, I don't know who's having the chest pain. You see what the problem is? I was interviewing a 19-year-old Hispanic kid in rural California who was having these problems with the white patches on his face in the summertime. And he did the obvious query, and he got, in fact, the totally correct answer, giving him, except it said hypopigmentation. He totally blipped over that, had no use for the first 4 results, because they weren't in his language. So there's multiple issues here. A, who's the authority for medical information about white patches on your face? B, how do we get in a language that's appropriate for you, whatever you are? Knowing that C, we can't really tell who you are on the other end of the browser, right? I mean, one of the big issues for us is that a single cookie, a single identifier, may be, the laptop in the kitchen. Mom uses it, dad uses it, little brother uses it, little daughter uses it, the dog uses it, as we know from New Yorker. And it's one cookie, and they're asking 5 different sets of questions. And so it's very tough to know in that case. So I think this is a two-way street. We can provide information, but we can only go so far. Until we can mind meld with you, we can do the best we can to provide authoritative, credible, diverse answers, and then you've got to reach us. You've got to help us out.
And actually, Microsoft has a huge array of health products, and we are trying to make it a social system and improve kind of like what's out there. But yeah, you want to do it really, really well and be very, very careful. But you can already like get your records online, and if you choose to, abstract that up, form groups, get information. So yeah, I think systems will start to appear that are quite good.
Bobby, you have a comment, and then we'll go to the questions.
One of the issues that we're faced, I know in my area of specialty, is that about 80% of the people don't trust the experts for whatever reason. And so what happens is they ignore those sites, and they go to a variety of other sites. And I cruise those sites on a routine basis, and it's just amazing how much wrong information is out there. And I know it's not your responsibility to go in and correct that. Very few people that I know are experts to have the time to go in and write back to each of these different websites, because they spring up on a routine basis, to demonstrate to them that their information is not factual. And in fact, a lot of it builds around beliefs, not scientific information. So we're faced with a situation that the most visited sites are wrong. And I'd love to hear your comment on how to deal with that.
I think experts should be sharing that information with the public in a language that's consumable. Right? Like, there's lots of ways to do it. You see lots of professors that get out there, they'll write an op-ed for the New York Times, they'll start their own blogs and start putting out more and more data to get people there. Like, reach out. Apparently there's
Let's-
24 hours a day.
Let's get this question here.
You've mostly preempted my question. I am very concerned about information quality, especially when information is coming from a whole variety of sources. And I absolutely agree that experts are not often believed. There's a big anti-government feeling out among the social networks, and so how do you, and let's just go back into history. We've had big issues about fluoridation of water, big questions about whether vaccines are safe. Current questions are cell phones causing brain cancer. There's an awful lot of very bad information. Now, Dan suggested earlier in the session that people have to learn to, ought to learn how to distinguish good information from bad information. I would submit that's not such an easy thing for an individual to do. And it's not so great to have a body to certify what information is good because you know, maybe they're the food industry who's trying to convince everybody that ketchup is a good vegetable. The question is, how shall we, in this era of an enormous variety of information sources, enormous ease of providing information, how are we going to begin to address the quality of the information that we're putting out?
I think you put your finger exactly on it. A major part of the problem is it's too easy to publish, right? It used to be that you actually had to write something and you had to take it to somebody else to get it copied or put into a journal or a newspaper or something, and there was a barrier to entry called editors. And that was a major quality control mechanism. Lots of junk still got published, but now what do you need to do? Well, from my cell phone, I can write a novel, or I can write a little op-ed, or I can create a website trivially. I could do it, you know, in the next 15 minutes and put it up there, and it will be indexed and we can find it. So I think that means that we need to give power to the people in terms of that's the education problem. I never said it was easy. I don't think accreditation is the problem either. I can also set up my own accreditation agency, right? I can buy a new website, set it up, it's gonna look super official. So that's a major problem. So I don't know how to solve that. We now live in a new universe. The future is of easy publication, and it's gotta be in your hands to figure out what's right, what you believe.
One last comment. I think it was Congress that turned the tomato into a vegetable.
Not the people.
So Ira has a question.
Yes, I'm using my prerogative here. You talked a lot about interdisciplinarity, and I want to channel some people who were speakers earlier in the week who aren't here, who were musicians and performance artists, and I'll add one from my field, which is journalism and storytelling, to say that information comes and goes in a lot of different forms. And would any of you, are you thinking about like involving a storyteller or an artist as, talk to us about that in your, or a musician. We know the civil rights movement, music was very important. What are you thinking about these other sort of outside the box ways of getting people involved in what you're doing?
That would be a great way to get the journalism school involved with all the other schools.
Well,
help them like get that message out there to the public.
Well, we already have an artist who's coming in to put all the artwork in our center, and he's working at the interface of environmental science and his own, that's his motivation. So he's going to work with our scientists directly. I also want to throw out the question of methods for managing knowledge development or ideas that are coming in, like you suggested, using blogs and so forth to get, the information from those people we want to reach on what their needs are. We can't afford to have a bunch of staff to be handling all that coming in. So are there tools? I know I've seen some on the web, but for idea management. So partial them into, here's the most common thing coming forward. Here are the critical questions.
Yeah, I think if you just use the web to do that, you just need a shared space. You know, form some shared spaces where everyone can collaboratively edit and keep their stuff. And maybe you start to, you know, identify topics that this stuff can start to fall under. And I wanted to add another thing. I couldn't do my research if I didn't have a multidisciplinarian team. I mean, it's what makes my research, you know, good. And you have to value each other. The team doesn't work together unless you each value and respect each other. And I just wanted to give you some encouragement about that, because if you do find the right people, and that's a key, the language problems will start to go away. You'll get a shared language. It's rough when it starts, and maybe it does take a year. I don't even remember anymore. I remember speaking a language as a psychologist that computer scientists didn't get, and they used words in ways I used words differently. But it went away, and it seemed like it just naturally went away, and everything was fine. So.
And I have experienced that. The difference is our center has new groups coming in constantly that have just formed, and they can't work together for a year. So we're looking for facilitated methods to move more quickly to common currencies in language.
So one of the common threads I think you're hearing from Mary, Abdur, and I is this idea that it's kind of the engineering mindset. Go out and do something. Don't spend the rest of the year thinking about it. It's very easy to overthink it. And so I think when Mary says, you just make this space, that's sort of our code for do it. Get out there and do it. If it doesn't work, that's fine. Just try it again. Just keep working on it. And to the other point about this multidisciplinarian perspective is the multiple disciplines have to actually contribute something. And you can bring in random disciplines that may not be valuable to the actual joint effort. So one of the things, to echo what Abdur said, was an interesting way to do this is actually to analyze this stuff, is to metricize it and understand what's working, what's not working. So as an example, one of my colleagues is working right now, it should be released maybe later this week, on a rap song to teach people how to search better. Right? Musician, not modern musician, right? And he did it at home. So a lot of this development stuff of integrating multiple disciplines is actually fairly inexpensive to do. And we will then analyze the result of that. How many people click on that? Will it go viral? If it goes viral, then we totally win, right? You would totally win.
I actually love the suggestion of just do it. It's like the Nike ad, because what's happened is we have a whole cyber team, and they keep telling me, well, we can't do that till we get this kind of programmer, and we can't do it till we have blah, blah, blah.
Think VC. Cut them off.
Yeah. You're fired.
Fail.
So this has been a very interesting final topic. 2 hours have already gone quickly by. I would like to give the opportunity to Abdur, Dan, and Mary for some parting thoughts. Held up for the whole week.
So my common thread for this is, how do we actually make sure our kids keep this love of learning, have critical thinking, and are always asking good questions? Because most of the things that we've talked about this week and the frustrations of every one of these disciplines has been because either the general public doesn't have those attributes, the people we're working with don't have those attributes, or something. And it's not about the technology, it's always about the people. That's what we're doing all this stuff for. So those are my two thoughts.
So I'll continue that. I totally agree with what Abdur just said. I know it's rare, but it's worked out here. But in thinking as a futurist, I think one of the key ideas here for this thing, for the FIA going forward, is how can we become fluent enough with our technology that it gets out of the way? Okay? Information is information is information. And whatever form it comes in, you have to be able to understand it. That's the education piece. You have to be able to assess it. But you have to be able to generate it. So we need to become sufficiently adept with our tools that we can create the things we want. We can communicate cross disciplines. We can communicate fluidly and intelligently, so we can all understand where we want to go in our future.
And building on both of those, I think if we build the right tools, probably using novel techniques that don't exist today, everyone can keep curious. So what I'm encouraging is you don't just focus on the kids, focus on the baby boomers, focus on the elderly, focus on the impaired. But I hope the goal is that everyone finds curiosity in their lives and is able to keep lifelong learning going. And the second thing I want to leave you guys with is that there was a lot of momentum that went into producing this long series of events, and you've all shown so much energy and curiosity. I just hope you can sustain it and actually make some of this stuff happen. Thanks for having us.
So at this point, I'd like to close this proceedings, but give Ira and Allison a chance at last parting words themselves. And also, let's continue a show of thanks and gratitude for all of our panelists.
Wow, thank you all. This was just amazing and a really important set of conversations to end the week with. Thank you all. And also thank all of you for being here to be a part of these conversations. This is just the beginning. Again, this is a launch week, and we're going to move forward. But there's a few people we do want to thank. Obviously, Charlie and Ann, who have just really made this going, and to all of the volunteers throughout the week that have really made this happen, as well as to all of the different colleges that have contributed to support the Future of Information Alliance, and all of our founding partners that are here today as well as going forward. In fact, founding partners, if you're here, please stay, and then we'll walk over to where our next meeting is. But again, to all of you, thank you. And we will continue the conversation about how to move forward in the coming weeks and months. Part of it will be through our brainstorming board, but part of it will also be through Google Moderator and a discussion online to bring us to the next steps of the next activities that we'll be doing.
So thank you for coming. Watch our, if you probably got here because you went to our website and registered or learned about this, so fia.umd.edu, watch that space. We'll be announcing the seed grant program. We'll be announcing the next steps. We'll be showing you how to get on Google Moderator and continue this conversation about what else we should be doing. There's a lot of content on that site. We'd like a lot more. We'd like you to contribute content. So get in touch with us about how to do that. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you.